Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our scheduled Sunday afternoon talk. It gives me great pleasure to welcome and introduce to you Janice Selbie. I was so pleased to run across all the content that you guys have created online, because this is actually a topic, the topic of religious trauma, something that is often misunderstood. And, thank you very much. We are very grateful that you are spending your time with us to educate us and to give us some more insight into this.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's just 8 o'clock in the morning here on Sunday morning in British Columbia, Canada, and I really can't think of anything else that I would rather do than get to talk with interested people about religious trauma. So thank you for reaching out.
Yeah. I think what we should do from the onset is just to clarify some of the misconceptions, because I was speaking to a friend earlier this week, and I was, I brought up the topic of religious trauma, and the first thing is obviously somebody they ask you, well, where did the priest touch you? Not realizing that when we speak of religious trauma, we are talking on a more psychological level. The patterns of behavior that you get caught up in, and these things that are imprinted on your psyche as a young child. And these are the chains of bondage that we seek to break and free ourselves from.
Yes, and for that reason, I typically tell people that my area of interest is working with survivors of religious trauma syndrome. And so syndrome describes it's a collection of symptoms. So if we're talking about religious trauma syndrome, which that phrase was coined by Dr. Marlene Winell years ago, 30 years ago, and it's really used to describe the negative mental health impacts of spending time in a high demand, authoritarian, rigid religious group.
Right. It's funny because whenever you point people to the behaviors that you associate with a cult-like mentality, and you say to them, isn't your religion just a little bit like that? You'll always find them barking at the idea, and it's like, but it is so universal. That high control environment that you mentioned, it's got so many detrimental effects. But let's dive right into it. Just tell us a little bit about your background and what led you into this field of religious trauma, and how did you get involved in it initially?
Sure. Yes. So I grew up in a Pentecostal family. So my parents believed the Bible literally,
Right.
spoke in tongues, around the house and in church. When I was sick, they would anoint my head with oil. They really, truly believed. And I would say my mom tried hard to live that out. She's a very loving, compassionate person. My dad is a narcissist. So when you combine narcissism with fundamentalism in a male who's the patriarchal head of the family, it's not a very fun time. So there was a lot of challenges growing up in that home. And I came to love rules because my dad was very volatile. And I felt if I could just learn the rules, then I'd be safe. And then that aspect of me really, I think, got overdeveloped, this need for rules and dependency on rules. And then I married a man who also was a Christian, a Pentecostal, and he wanted to go to Bible college to become a pastor. So when we moved away, then in that small Bible college community, I started seeing other women who would show up in the grocery store and they would be wearing head coverings. And I thought, are they Amish? What is that about? So their hair would be up in a bun and the bun would be covered with a piece of cloth. And my husband at the time said, no, they're not Amish. They're just Christian women. They're Mennonite women. I don't know if you have Mennonites over in Africa or Amish people, but they're very, very conservative. So they're wearing long skirts and dresses down to the floor, the women, no makeup, no jewelry. The hair is always covered. The men are wearing beards, and they're also considered plain people, part of the plain people. And so he told me, my ex-husband, that it was in the Bible was in the New Testament, and that women were not freed from that. It's just that no one really obeyed it, and he didn't care if I obeyed it or not. But to me, oh, it's more rules. That's great. How wonderful. So then I did this deep dive into the Mennonite world, and became even more conservative, homeschooled our children for a number of years, didn't have TV, stopped wearing jewelry, makeup, started covering my hair, wearing a head covering and long dresses all the time. Just always kind of trying to make myself less, as I think the Bible tells people and encourages and demands. We must decrease so God can increase. So I really lived that out for many years, and then got to a point where we had a series of calamities. Many terrible things happened in our family, and it just broke me. It was like it broke through my cognitive dissonance, and I thought, I'm living my life the best I can, trying to be godly and follow the Bible, and it's just a storm of terrible things that keep happening to me. I must have bet on the wrong horse. Like, God might be out there, but he's not here. He's not in Christianity. And so that is the point where I really started liberating myself from the tyranny of Christianity.
Amazing. Wow, that's powerful. But was that was like the straw that broke the camel's back for you, and then you you obviously find yourself at a stage where you've reconciled all of this more or less in your life, and you decided, look, okay, it's time for me to pass this along and to share what I've learned with other people. And tell us a little bit about that decision that
Sure.
that moment where you decided, okay, look, I'm going to go into practice and put this to work.
Yes. Well, we hear the phrase often, and atheists hear this a lot when they've left Christianity. Christians would love to say, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like, it's not all bad. And I say, I drained the tub and there was no baby in there in the first place. So
the tub.
That's right. And so I thought, I need some changes. I actually divorced my husband, and I went back to school, and I decided I wanted to focus on mental health and counseling. At the time, I didn't even know about religious trauma, but I knew that there were issues in my family of origin, like I explained, that I wanted to tackle, and that I love hearing people's stories and interacting with people. So I thought counseling, therapy would be a good fit. And then as I was going through that, I started learning about other things and learning about trauma and how deeply impacted I was by my family of origin. And then I also started recognizing the things I was feeling as I got farther and farther out of Christianity were very similar to things people explained when they had left cults. And that was mind-blowing to me, because I thought, well, my Pentecostal Christianity, evangelicalism is mainstream. It's not a cult, but guess what? It's pretty darn culty. There are a lot of aspects and elements in there that seem quite similar. So that's when I really was deconstructing my religion in a very significant way and looking for other people. I didn't know anyone else. I felt so alone. I didn't know anyone else who had tried as hard as me or been as devout as I felt that I was, and then left and went on to live a happy life. So I started educating myself about beliefs and how they form, and cults, and the dangers of mind control. And finally, I found Dr. Marlene Winnell on the internet, and she wrote a fantastic book that I recommend to everyone who's come out of religion. And her book is called Leaving the Fold. And so I read Dr. Winnell's book, and then I reached out. I found her, I tracked her down, and we developed a friendship. And I attended some of her events, and we are colleagues. And now I'm affiliated with her work as well. And so that's when I really started focusing on recovery from religious trauma as my niche in counseling.
Yeah. And it's very it's very strange, because I've also gone to a therapist or two in my day, and it's very seldom that you find a therapist that is comfortable talking about this, especially in South Africa. It's I don't think that there is any formal training on this particular aspect, and B, it's generally a subject. I mean, unless it's probably some personal traumatic event or something. But I found severe reluctance and pushback from the therapists that I saw. They said it's not really something that they want to deal with.
Right. It's a sacred cow.
And I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
What's wrong with this?
And I do run up against that also. So most of my clients are in the United States, even though I'm in Canada. Most of them are in the United States. And then now I also do have clients all around the world. And I recently did have someone from South Africa who participated in my divorcing religion workshop. So every single country has religious trauma, because every religion pretty much has religious trauma in it. So my clients aren't all just coming out of Christianity. I've worked with people who have left Scientology, Orthodox Judaism, Islam. There are many different religious groups that are very high demand and that twist people's thinking. And therapists are afraid to talk about it because they don't want to offend people or get in trouble. I say we need to be talking about this. That's why I started the Conference on Religious Trauma, or CORT, C-O-R-T, and having psychologists and social workers and therapists and survivors come and share their experiences and their knowledge about religious trauma.
Yeah, I can really recommend that playlist, because I think I posted it in the description of the YouTube chat as well. If not, I will definitely put it there, but everybody needs to go and watch that, because that was some powerful stuff. I really, really got a lot from listening to those
and that's on my YouTube channel. Yes, I'm posting all the old sessions from my conferences. So I do the Conference on Religious Trauma, and I also do one for purity culture survivors, because Christianity very much wants to control your sexuality. So that conference is called Shameless Sexuality, Life After Purity Culture. And I am also posting former sessions of those on my YouTube channel.
Amazing. So what were some of the key moments or turning points in your career that they always say hindsight's 20/20. We reflect on something, we have a greater appreciation for it, but surely there must be a couple of milestones or markers in your career that have had where you can say, damn, this really made a difference in the lives of these trauma survivors.
Mm-hmm. Yes. For me personally, it was connecting with Dr. Winnell and Dr. Daryl Ray. Daryl Ray has an organization called Recovering from Religion, which you are familiar with, and hopefully the folks watching this show are also familiar with recoveringfromreligion.org. Because both of those people are psychologists, and they both have written books on this topic of religious trauma and also sexuality. And that made me feel validated when I found out, okay, there are people who know more than me, who've been alive longer than I have and been studying for longer than I have. And they also find this to be a real thing. And I find when my clients also receive non-judgment and validation with me, that I recognize and understand the significant losses that they're talking about, because it's really a lot of grief work, because the losses are tremendous. We suffer losses when we're inside a controlling group, because they control who can be in our life and what we can do, how we think. And then there are losses again when we leave the group and we manage to break free, and we lose our identity, our community, and our worldview. Those are huge losses, but you're expected to keep going. Well, I'm sorry that you lost everything, but you better show up for work on Monday. Whereas even if we have the loss of a pet, there might be more understanding, take a day off, take an afternoon off, whatever it is. But when you say, I think everything I just devoted my life to for the last 40 years has turned out to be a lie, people, it's hard for them to accept that. And they say, well, you're a grown-up, you just stopped believing in Santa Claus. But it goes much, much deeper than that. So being validated is an important part of the journey.
Yeah. And it's interesting. There's this idea called the sunken cost fallacy.
Yes.
Where people are reluctant to admit defeat and just say, look, okay, it's bullshit. Let me just, let me rather recover what I still can. But they feel that they've sunken so much time and effort and resources into this particular aspect of their lives that it would be foolish to let that investment go to waste. So it's strange. I spoke to an atheist a few weeks ago, and he said to me, at the end of the day, I don't think that anybody really believes. They've just been pretending for so long that it would be awkward to quit now.
I wish that was true. I think it would make the transition easier. But I know for myself, I believed 100% because that's what I was indoctrinated, and questioning, was not permitted. But the sunk cost fallacy, that really is legitimate. And I see it especially in people who have devoted their lives to being missionaries or pastors or priests, people who have spent tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars attending Bible college. I got my air quotes going, to get, degrees, to be pastors and so forth. And then also, if like me, they married young because they weren't to have sex outside of marriage. And so they only married someone because they fit this criteria. I had to marry a man and he had to be a Christian. Right. And that was it. So he wasn't the person that I would have chosen to marry, but he was the one that I did marry. So once we've put that kind of investment into the belief system, it's hard to walk away. Or even because I encouraged other people, I influenced other people to become Christians. It's pretty humbling then to say, you know what, I actually see now that I was wrong. And so I'm not following that belief system anymore. That's hard.
Yeah. It takes a special level of courage to admit when you are wrong and to say, sorry, guys, my mistake.
Oops.
Well, all that Jesus stuff I told you the other day.
Do over. Yeah.
So let's dive a little bit into religious trauma syndrome and take it apart and see what we can understand about it. So what are some of the common signs and symptoms that people who are going through religious trauma experience and exhibit?
Right. The symptoms are similar to complex PTSD. So a person might have PTSD typically if they've had a one-time horrifying experience. But complex PTSD tends to plague those of us who have had repeated exposure to a terrible thing over and over again. So symptoms related to complex PTSD. So there might be nightmares, intrusive thoughts, and sometimes that can cross over into a kind of religious OCD, and that is known as scrupulosity. So instead of having to wash your hands 100 times before you leave the house, you have to say the sinner's prayer 100 times throughout your day or something like that. That's kind of scrupulosity. We can have difficulty trusting others and difficulty trusting ourselves. I believed that I was ready to die for it. I taught my children they had to be ready to become martyrs when the atheists took over or whatever it was that I feared. So I believed it so fully. What else do I believe that I don't know is wrong? So trusting other people can be hard. Trusting ourselves again. Difficulty making decision. We can end up in a kind of analysis paralysis. We're so terrified because as firm believers, we thought our life, our salvation was hanging in the balance. It was terrifying. We couldn't make a decision on our own. We had to pray about it all the time. Pray to God, talk to the pastor, consult someone else. So it can be hard for us to make decisions. And then I would say emotional volatility or numbness as we're trying to work out what has happened to us. And so then we can fall into substance misuse as we try and numb those feelings or cope. And then the last thing I had noted was relationship trouble, especially with codependency, setting boundaries, people pleasing, because codependency is kind of baked right into Christianity, or really when you're talking about Abrahamic religions, because it's all supposed to be about God and serving others and nothing about you personally. So we have to learn those things, and it takes a while. It doesn't just happen overnight.
Yeah. And, just to clarify, codependency is when the way that you feel or that your personal state depends on an external, so there's an external locus of control.
Right. Yes. It's lacking. It's almost like we're lacking a sense of self. And so we're constantly might be looking to others to validate us, but in a negative way, or to kind of get our sense of self. So when I stopped believing, I really did have an identity crisis, because the only self I knew first and foremost was a Christian, a devout Christian fundamentalist woman, a homeschooling mother. Okay, I wasn't homeschooling anymore. A wife, then I wasn't a wife anymore. All these things that I thought defined me just dissolved, and I had to figure out and rebuild myself from the ground up.
And what are some of the most prevalent types of harm or abuse that you have seen that's being inflicted by all these religious doctrines and institutions?
Right. I would say probably, well, the most common one that I work with is people trying to recover from a fear of hell. Because if that's something that has been, you've been indoctrinated with from childhood. So think of being 4 or 5 years old, and your parents or Sunday school teacher, elders in your life, the people who you depend on for survival and to help you navigate the world, they are telling you these fantastic stories that just seem crazy, but you don't know. You're a kid. You don't know if Superman is real when you're watching TV. So they tell us these things. We have no way to gauge their veracity, whether they're true or not. We have no ability to think critically and discern. And it's delivered with an element of fear. If you do not believe this, if you do not say these magic words, you will be separated from mommy and daddy. You will burn in hell forever. There will be torture. And in fact, you are so bad that God had to send his son to be murdered for you. Being a child and hearing these things, it warps you. It twists you. So fear of hell is a huge one. I have written down another one. Oh, of course, overcoming, coming to terms first with the idea of patriarchy, and that we're surrounded by it. It's everywhere, but especially in the church, it's a patriarchal power structure. So kind of having to learn to find our voice, especially as women. And then, physical abuse, corporal punishment. I've worked with clients who were tied to their chair, to finish their meal, or tied to their beds or their cribs so they couldn't get up in the night, who had to kneel on broomsticks as punishment. Just awful, awful things. And the terrible thing is that the Christian parents feel that they must discipline, and I got my air quotes going, discipline their children in that way, because they fear the children. Nothing is more fearful than the children being disobedient and being cast aside from God. So they'll do anything to keep them.
Well, this is actually scriptural, isn't it? There is something, what spare the rod and spoil the child, or something.
Right. Yeah. It's terrible, just terrible. And I was influenced by that. And I mean, so the apologies, of course, that I have made to my children have just been as sincere and repeated and in writing and, in words, till my kids in their late teens said, "Mom, you don't have to apologize anymore. We see that you're different, and we know that you were under the influence when you were saying and doing these things. So apologies are in order for people who trained their children in that way."
Yeah, and on that note, just as an aside, this is something that really struck with me when I just deconverted. I watched this debate where I think it was Hitchens and Fry who tore into the Catholic Church, and he said the thing that the Catholic Church should start with is with a heartfelt apology. And a series of heartfelt apologies, and he listed a litany of all the church's crimes. So, I get that. I get that completely.
Yeah. Well, and something else that Canada, has in common with South Africa, we treated our Indigenous people terribly, took away their land, forced them into residential school. There was all kinds of abuse that took place there. And that touched me personally because the only sister I've ever had is Indigenous, and she was taken from her reserve where she lived with her family. The police and social workers would go on to the reservations and forcibly remove children and stick them with white Christian families. And so my parents wanted me to have a sister, so they joined the foster care system, which is good because children, lots of children need foster care. But all my mom had said when I was 4 years old, she just said, "Oh, you're getting a big sister today." And so I thought, oh, this is how big sisters show up. They show up with a suitcase at your door. And she showed up, and she didn't look like me. And so I knew she wasn't born into my family. And all I was told was never to ask her about where she came from because it would be hurtful to her, and I didn't want to hurt her. But I didn't even have an understanding. I wasn't even taught in school about the harms perpetrated against our Indigenous people. That wasn't until I was in school to become a therapist. Then I started learning about the 60 Scoop and residential schooling. So that's been a part of my journey as well, coming to terms with that and working to repair and build relationships with my sister. She did want to maintain contact with our family. So it's been quite a journey.
Yeah, I can imagine. And this is one thing that religion sells very well is fear and guilt. Those are the two. It teaches you to. But this is the thing: is a relationship where you have to love something that you also fear is it's actually sadomasochistic.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It's like you love to you want to punish you get enjoyment and pleasure out of punishing yourself with this idea, and it's amazing how those two have been. When you look at it from a distance, it's such an obvious. There's something so obviously wrong.
Yeah, it's an abusive dynamic. It really is. It's, what if my daughter came to me and said, "Well, my boyfriend or girlfriend is threatening that if I don't love them, they're going to torment me. They're going to isolate me, alienate me, or they're physically going to harm me. But they tell me that they love me." That is obviously an abusive relationship dynamic. And that's exactly what goes on according to the Bible. That's the type of God that people are told they must serve. Even look at the stories. Look at Noah's Ark. He loved everyone so much that he killed everyone and everything on the earth, even pregnant women and babies and everything. Everything had to go except a select few that he chose to start over. That sounds pretty horrible and abusive, but that is looked to as a children's story. Noah's Ark, it's done up in cartoons and put on wallpaper in children's bedrooms. I'm like, holy, people have been so brainwashed. Just terrible.
Yeah.
And fear, guilt, and shame are the unholy trifecta. That's what keeps people involved. They keep having to return to confess and ask forgiveness. That's how the churches stay in business. They have to keep you feeling so guilty and in so much fear that you'll come back every Sunday or Saturday.
It's a circle that just repeats itself. I mean, if you can plot each one of those, you feel you're afraid of something, then you do what you're not supposed to do, and you feel guilty, and then you're shamed for being human at the end of the day, because this is something that we do as human beings. We make mistakes, we trip up. Nobody's perfect. It's a learning process that we go through. But the very essence to make you feel shame for being human, for having human experiences, human emotions, and for acting in a human fashion, you have to be ashamed for that.
Exactly. I have one visual I'd love to share with your audience. And so this is what I share with my clients. Life is like a giant buffet table. So we're looking over the table. As far as we can see, there are plates heaped with beautiful experiences. That's the food. Christianity, religion would have you starve to death at that buffet table of life. And you don't have to. You don't have to be bound by that. You can take a bite of anything, any experience on that table, as long as it's not hurting someone else, as long as it's not against the law. Go for it. You might think it's so yummy, you come back for second and third helpings, or it might not suit you, and you might say, no, I don't like that very much. I'm going to move on to the next experience. And that's it. You don't have to be, smothered in shame over this or guilt. There are no life police. You get to decide what is right for you.
Yeah. So, to summarize all of that, we can say Christianity is the anorexic at the buffet.
Yes. I think so. Yeah, that's good. That seems right. Oh, and it's just it's such a stark image to think of. I really want people to think about that, because they're free. They can make the choices they want to make.
Right. So, you talked a little bit about the impact of religion on children, but let's unpack that a little bit, because I remember distinctly, some of the first memories I have about going to church was just the fire and brimstone, and that teaching that you'll never be enough, you'll never amount to anything. And it follows you in your life, because you can see how it manifests in your relationships, where you will be, because of that thing in your subconscious that you've been told and that you absorbed as a child, you realize in your adult relationships that you constantly seek affirmation from people, and that you want to be seen and noticed, because you were told as a child that you have no worth, that you're not inherently worthy of being noticed and observed. So this is people say it's an extreme thing to say that religion is child abuse, but I really think that religion has got a very negative and detrimental effect when exposed to children.
Yeah, I totally agree. And how can you, if you're repeatedly told over and over again that you're no good without God, you're nothing on your own, you're a lowly sinner, all these things, and you're taking that in, and then also you're not allowed to have pride in any of your accomplishments. Pride is something that's natural for humans. It's how when we master a skill, even just learning to tie our shoes or something, we feel good about ourselves. That helps build our self-esteem. When our self-esteem is higher, then we feel like we can keep taking next steps and trying new things. And codependency, this is also part of what you're talking about, that low self-esteem that we can have, that prevents us from being able to move forward. We just kind of stay in this really low space, and then we're vulnerable, easily taken advantage of. So I encourage people to always be learning, always be trying something new, and you don't have to get it right the first time. And the way you do it doesn't have to look like how everybody else does it, but keep learning, keep growing.
So what are some of the therapeutic approaches and coping strategies that that is effective in helping people recover from religious trauma. What are some of the, when we, obviously we're not going to diagnose ourselves, but, when you notice these things happening in your life, what are some of the strategies that you can deploy to, to come to terms with that?
Right. So I think, first of all, gaining recognition of what's going on. So even just being able to question and think, oh, you know what? I grew up in a really religious home. Some of these things might be applicable to me. Just sitting with that, just thinking of how your religious training has influenced your life and may still be influencing your life. And so, of course, I tell people to educate themselves, read books. I mentioned Dr. Darrell Ray. He has The God Virus is a book that he wrote, and Sex and God is another book that he wrote. There are podcasts like the Divorcing Religion podcast that you can learn from. And of course, the videos I mentioned from my conference. Also connecting with a therapist or coach or counselor who understands about religious trauma and can help you connect some of those dots. I use a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy with my clients. So we're considering what are the things they were taught and how is that impacting them today? And is there a way that we can reframe that? Is there anything good that we can take out of what they learned or experienced? Or does the whole thing need to be jettisoned? And what can we replace those negative thoughts with instead? So that's a lot of the work that I do. It is very, it has so much to do with psychology because that's how we absorbed it. So it's not an easy overnight fix. And I will just say, not everyone comes away from religion feeling traumatized. Trauma is subjective. Two people can witness a car accident. One can hardly move after they're paralyzed by what they just saw. And the other person just goes, oh, that was terrible, and goes off to work. And they're fine. It depends what else is going on in your life. It depends on the type of supports available to you when you experience the traumatizing experience. So I recognize that not everyone is traumatized by religion, but a lot of people are.
Yeah. Religion is a bit like a the seed of a poisonous plant. Wherever you can sow it on rocky soil, sometimes it doesn't grow, but when you sow it in the fertile grounds, it takes root and it generates a whole lot of thistles and weeds.
Right. And oops. And the
just decline that call. I'm so sorry.
No problem. And I'll just say too, the fertile ground is vulnerability. That's when we are, if there's a transition going on in your life, whether you're growing as a child or you're a young adult going off to university, or you've had a divorce or a loss, that transition makes you very vulnerable. That's when cults and religions love to get in there and try and suck people in, and that's when we're vulnerable.
Yeah, it's like I say, religion is not a friend of the poor; it's a friend of poverty. And it's not a friend of the weak. It's a friend of the emotionally vulnerable. Like you said, you find yourself in a and we are inclined to seek solutions, to seek help, to look for connections with other people. And what did the church do? Come to the potluck. Here's the solution. Here's the community. You'll feel like you belong. And it's what's the English word for it? Like it's fake. It's a facade, because there's nothing of substance actually behind it. At the end of the day, it's window dressing. It's window dressing to sell a product.
Right. We want to be teaching people that they can depend on themselves. They don't need to look to an external power source. And even if people are struggling with addiction and alcoholism, they don't need necessarily a 12-step program that has a higher power. You are capable to do those things, but it does help to have support. That's the success of those programs, is the support that's offered the community.
Yeah. 100% agree with you. Let's move on to one of my favorite topics, women in religion. I mean, if there was somebody who drew the short straw in the handout. So, if when it comes to religious trauma, what what have you noticed that specifically pertains to women, and how do they overcome some of the traumas that religion imposes on people?
Right. Yeah, definitely women get the short end of the stick. That's for sure. And very much it has to do with the patriarchy that
Yeah.
is just insisted on in religion. And I mean, other things that we are taught. And this goes for everyone, but so you must forgive. And I, with my clients, I call forgiveness the F word, the real F word, because forgiveness can be weaponized by abusers, especially in religion. Instead, what's actually important is acceptance. We have to have enough clarity to see, yes, this thing really did happen. It really was done to me. And now I get to decide how I am going to respond. Do I want to keep this person in my life? Do I want to keep attending here? Whatever it is, that's how we take our power back. No forgiveness required. So demands for obedience, demands for forgiveness. And we're just set up believing that men are the ones that have greater knowledge, experience, value. They're the ones really in charge. And that's a lot to overcome.
Mm. It's quite strange that you mentioned this, because even in South Africa, there's a specific tribe to the north of the country that have got matriarchs as the leaders of the community. So
Wow.
it's very, very strange gender roles that we have in our communities. But patriarchy, it's a big it's a big thing, and it's a big issue.
Yeah.
Because it's mandated by scripture. The man is the head of the household, the women shall be subservient, blah blah blah. Get the hell out of here.
Yeah, it's hard on everyone. It's also hard on men because I mean, I think back to when I was becoming more and more conservative and wearing my head covering, and I really felt I needed to decrease myself, and so my husband could really shine. That's my mom's word. Never outshine your husband. So I tried to make myself less and less, but my husband at the time, that's not what he wanted. He wanted more of a partner. He didn't want someone he had to rule over, and it really thrust him into a position that he was uncomfortable with. But that's what scripture said, that he had to be the leader and make all the decisions and all these kinds of things. So patriarchy is very hard on women, and it also can be hard on men.
I remember I spoke to Dr. Leo Igwe a while ago. He said to me the thing that one of the benefits of atheism is agency. That it restores the agency that you have. And this leads into the next question I wanted to ask you, which is some of the strategies and resources that are effective for women when you want to claim that autonomy, when you want to reclaim your autonomy and your identity after you've experienced trauma from religion.
Right. Yeah. Well, this is one reason why I started my YouTube channel with all the videos on it, because I have videos on there from a lot of women like Dr. Marlene Winnell, who's a pioneer in the field of religious trauma, and Annie Laurie Gaylor, who's someone I really admire. She is one of the founders of Freedom from Religion Foundation online. And so learning from Annie Laurie Gaylor, and she's spoken at my events before, reading and watching feminist literature and documentaries has been huge for me, and shocking. And still sometimes when I see things that other women have done through history or are doing, and I think, wow, that's amazing. And then my new husband says to me, well, that's also you. You're a trailblazer. And it's that's wow, how did that happen? So yeah, really feminist spaces, and seek out safe spaces to speak out. And one thing I did for myself on my journey, back when I used to be on Twitter, I'm no longer on there, but I made 2 accounts on Twitter, one as myself, and then one that was genderless. And I just called that one, I think I called it just Divorcing Religion, and I didn't have a photo on there. And I decided I'm going to use that account to present myself as I think a male would. So I didn't use emojis. I didn't try and soften things. When I saw something was wrong or I disagreed with or I had an opinion, I just said it. I put it up there, and people would comment and respond as if I was a man. They would say, yeah, way to go, man, or yeah, totally agree, brother, or whatever sorts of things. It was so funny and interesting and really, really liberating for me to do that. I think that helped empower me so that now I don't need that. I don't need to be hiding behind that. I feel more free just to be who I am, to speak my truth.
And I'm a very big proponent for group therapy sessions because there's such solidarity to be found in a shared, in a therapeutic environment when you have a shared trauma or a shared experience. What kind of community resources play an important part in recovering from religious trauma, or do you think it's more like an inside job?
I think both are really, really helpful. So chances are, if you were raised in a religious home, attending church was part of your situation as well. So you didn't only learn on your own, you also learned as part of a group. And communities are powerful. So it's important, it's imperative for us to develop a safe secular support system or network when we leave religion. So we're not just trying to go it alone, because it is a grieving process. We are vulnerable. Also, when we just leave a belief system, it can feel like there's this huge vacuum. And part of that is missing the community sense that we had, as well as sense of purpose and meaning. So I think it's really important for us. The most immediate place people can go to is online and look for atheist groups, look for humanist groups, also secular humanism. So I'm no longer religious. I do subscribe to secular humanism. I think it's important. I value other people. I want people to have dignity and equality. So I became the president of my local Atheist, Skeptics, and Humanist Association in my city. So yeah, don't just sit there on your own trying to figure it out. Also, I run the Divorcing Religion workshop. That's a small group workshop. And I offer a free online support group for anybody recovering from religious trauma every Tuesday night at 5:00 Pacific time. I'll send people an application form if they're interested. That's another way for people to grow community. They can reach out for support groups. Volunteering, also a great way to start building community for yourself, and you're helping the community around you too.
Yeah, I wanted to highlight this comment from a friend of the channel, Esther. She said, "Leaving religion felt like a loss of identity," and we touched a little bit on this earlier as well. Somebody, I've heard it equated to the grief that you go through when you lose a family member or a loved one. It's the same kind of process that one goes through. First of all, there is the absolute shock, and then it goes into different stages, and the stages that you go through until you finally get to acceptance and moving on are very similar between both of these.
Yes.
Very, very insightful.
Yes. And there are different types of grief that also can impact us quite heavily when we're talking about loss of religious belief. So this is something I wish more counselors and therapists were aware of, because as I mentioned earlier, the grief that we have isn't something that's socially sanctioned. It can't really be understood and expressed by society at large. So that part feels like you have to suffer in silence. And then there's also not having a body to bury. This is something, maybe if there's been a kidnapping or a plane crash or something, and people, or they don't have a body coming home from war, people struggle with how do they cope with that. And this is the same for us. We don't have anything to bury. I mean, I did bury a head covering. That was one of my ceremonies that I did. But yeah, so I totally can relate to the comment there, the loss of identity.
I really want to do this. I want to get our local atheist groups together, and we must roll the stone back in front of the tomb.
That's great. That's great. I love that idea.
Yeah. In closing, let's just talk a lot, because it's not all doom and gloom. People do recover from this. People reach levels of awareness of this, and make changes in their lives. Let's talk a little bit about some of the success stories where women have successfully navigated their way out of religious trauma and have just empowered themselves and gone on to live very fulfilling lives.
Oh, yes. Well, two off the top of my head that I know personally. One is an actress in the United States. Her name is Alice Gretchen. And she also went on to author a book called Wayward, which was her I call it an extimony instead of a testimony. It was about her growing up in religion and leaving religion, and particularly reclaiming her sexuality, because purity culture indoctrination had been so significant for her. Alice is a great example of that. I just actually interviewed a woman who's an extremely successful model. She has an OnlyFans channel. She was a pastor, and she's no longer a pastor. She's no longer religious, and her name is Nicole Mitchell. Really enjoyed speaking with her. And then someone named Dr. Valerie Tirico. I greatly admire Dr. Tirico. She has written extensively on religious trauma and recovery. She has a fantastic YouTube channel with a great series for people who are kind of exploring what just happened to them when it comes to recovering from religious trauma. So Valerie Tirico and Dr. Marlene Winnell, also, who I've mentioned, and me. I'm a success story.
Amazing. Yeah, no, I love having these conversations. People always say to me, like, Dean, why don't you get tired of having these conversations? You've left religion now, like, just carry on with your life. And I said, like, hell no. I've gone through such a, for me, it was, the whole process was so jarring. And, just realizing at the end of the day that with the best of intentions, people have fed me a load of BS from the time that I could talk and listen and comprehend. And I want to share that, just that awakening with other people. I just want to, I've gained so much value from it on a personal level that, who can blame me for wanting to tell people about, this newfound, this new outlook that I have on life, and that, all the benefits that you get from just letting go of all that guilt and living a fulfilled, wholesome whole life. It's great.
The freedom and the power, feeling empowered, feeling autonomous, embracing your power. It's amazing. Really, once you do that, I feel like nothing can stop you. Once you start actually understanding the potential that you have as a human and not being bound by what others think and say.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much for getting up early on a Sunday morning and going to share your experience with us. I really enjoyed this conversation. I initially planned only to have a brief conversation, but we've almost got double the time that we initially intended, and I could speak to you for hours. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for joining us. And if ever you need to connect with anybody on the African continent, we've got quite a network of atheists here as well. Please feel free to reach out to us, and let's keep in touch.
Thank you. I absolutely loved it. And I'd love to come back if you ever want to chat some more. Thank you. I feel very welcome here.
Thank you so much for your time.